Clay, welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom. Thrilled to have you here with me today.
Super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we've had some great conversations offline, and I know it's just going to be one of the fun conversations that we have on Paper Napkin Wisdom. So I'm really excited about you sharing your paper napkin wisdom that you wrote down with the audience. Can we start there?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I wrote down the gatekeepers are all gone except one, you. You are the last gatekeeper.
So this is a Clayism, right? This is one of yours.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely informed by lots of things I've read or heroes and mentors over the years. But yeah, this particular quote is mine. Yeah.
And I love it, and I think it's phenomenal. It'll play out in a lot of different ways, and really, actually, when I think about the conversations that we've had offline, you sort of spoke about some of this. But let me ask you why this was the one you shared with me here today.
Yeah, it's informed by probably the last 5 or 10 years of my life. I see a different, future and different economy where we sort of return to more entrepreneurship. And I really truly believe entrepreneurship and creative work and art is the future. It's like what you do with this podcast. Seth Godin talks about 500 years ago, nobody was unemployed because nobody was employed. You either owned a farm or you owned the local corner store. But the concept of going to a big dark building that somebody else owned and working for 12 hours was so foreign that literally the lubricant for the Industrial Revolution was gin. They had to give them gin. Clay Shirky talks about this in his book. They had to give them gin to keep people doing this. So this whole concept of going to work and going to a job, because it's a few generations old, we don't know anyone in our real life that didn't live through that. But in the whole of human history, it's really, really fairly recent. So I think pretty shortly we're returning to that, but yet we have this concept of gatekeepers. We have this concept of whether it's investors or book publishers or anyone who, because of their title or certification or ego, can tell you that you can't join that club, that your art isn't good enough, that you should go get a safe job and give up on your dream. Well, those gatekeepers are gone. I mean, some of them still have the office on Park Avenue in Manhattan, and some of them still have buildings, and they're not completely gone, as in they haven't all gone bankrupt or they're not completely gone, but they don't matter anymore. There's a million ways around them, but the one last gatekeeper that matters is you. You are the last gatekeeper. We all are our own last gatekeepers, as in we just need to get out of our own way and execute on what we want to do. And if someone tells us no, like this is a perfect example, the podcast you're doing, you ship your art all the time, and you didn't need to apply to the University of iTunes and have them reject you and say, no, Govin, you can't have a podcast. You did it. You chose yourself, you picked yourself, and you didn't see a gatekeeper standing in your way from you shipping the Paper Napkin podcast. And that is the opportunity that's available literally to everyone.
Yeah. What's really neat about this is that this idea of gatekeeper actually works in both ways, right? In the sense that other people are keeping us out, we're keeping ourselves out, perhaps, and this is what you're saying, right? That we're the gatekeeper to our own dreams. But doesn't that also work in reverse? That we're also the gatekeepers for ourselves. That we're the only gatekeeper for ourselves.
Yeah,
so like what comes into our world.
That's a really good point too, and I think. Yeah, that's I love the way you flip that around, because, for a long time, going back, Tim Ferriss talked about having a low information diet. And I think there are a lot of incoming things that we should be better gatekeepers about. This is actually a book I'm working on. I don't really talk too much about this publicly, but your prompt about the napkin and everything else got me thinking about it and writing it down. So I'm writing a book called The Last Gatekeeper about these concepts. And I think what you bring up is a really, really valid point of, we need to be better gatekeepers about what we let into our lives, whether that be competition or negativity or information or tweets or social media or comparison or news media, things like that doesn't necessarily serve us, right? We think we're paying attention to that to be informed, so that we're not missing out and to be safe. But in fact, it's impossible in today's sort of media day and age not to have that be an anchor or a ball and chain to your dream. I think the more we can turn those things off and become better information gatekeepers and comparison gatekeepers for ourselves. I think that's a brilliant point that you just made.
Yeah, and I wonder if, it's sort of like this inverse relationship between those two things, right? That the more we act as an active gatekeeper for that inbound track, maybe the more open we are as a gatekeeper on what we're putting out in the world, right? Because our attention maybe can only be on one of those gates, the inbound gate or the outbound gate. And then if it's on the in, then what we're creating can just go more openly.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. One of the most useful productivity plugins. My girlfriend works in the productivity space, and one of the most useful productivity plugins I've used this last couple of years now is the Facebook newsfeed eradicator. So there's still a lot of people who the way that they reach me is, via a Facebook message, or if someone mentions me or something in a post, I still want to see that. But when you open Facebook, it's literally designed to be addictive in the same way that crack cocaine or heroin is addictive. And it literally hits the same pleasure center in the brain and the same dopamine. And so these are, Facebook and Twitter and these tools have spent a lot of money designing a very addictive experience. There's a great book written about that called Hooked by a guy named Nir Eyal. He's got some great videos on YouTube, but Hooked is a great book explaining literally how kind of the dark arts of making your product and your service addictive. But they are. So I know that, and I've studied recently a little bit more about the brain and habits and kind of how we work. And it's not good to leave everything up to willpower, right? It's kind of like you don't buy the Oreos at the grocery store assuming you're going to take them home and not eat them, right? If they're in the cupboard, you're going to eat them. And so just like your diet happens at the grocery store, your consumption needs to happen at a higher level. You can't go to Facebook and say, I'm only going to check my messages, because you get sucked into the newsfeed. So I just found this plugin, Facebook Newsfeed Eradicator, completely turns it off. And so that's one tiny little tactic to have a lower information diet and not get sucked into the comparisons and the politics and everything else. And I think doing things at those higher levels where you just, if you don't buy the Oreos, you don't eat them. If you don't see the Facebook newsfeed, you don't get sucked into them. How can you turn off the gatekeeper of that information, or, implement kind of a gatekeeper of that information at a higher level? Like, don't watch the news. Don't read the newspaper. It's literally just, and it's funny because when you go away from it for a while and then look back, you realize that it's literally just all these, salacious headlines designed to make us worry, because then we buy the paper the next day, right? It's like murder on the loose, more news at 11, right? It's like those types of things.
Yeah, I mean, it's really true. And one of the things that we hear a lot about in technology when we're building technology is easy in, hard out, right? We want it to be easy to get people into our product, but really hard to get out.
Right.
That addictive behavior is hard baked in as a strategy. Let's talk about this paper napkin and the gatekeeper concept. How did this play out for you, Clay? Like, how did this work for you? Have you always been a great gatekeeper for yourself, or not?
No, and I would say every day I'm trying to be better. I still, I still like to check various social networks and things like that, but turning things like Facebook off. The way that the gatekeeper thing really started for me was I've always been interested in it. I've always believed in, entrepreneurship and creativity. And that's kind of why I ended up leaving my decade-long corporate job at Accenture, was because it was great. I liked it, but I didn't love it. And I worked with really smart people, but they didn't really value entrepreneurship or creativity or new ideas, because their business, they employ 400,000 people today, and their business works a lot better if you can pull you or me off of a project in New York and plop us into a project on Miami. And so we all need to be interchangeable people. And so I escaped that. And in 2009, I got a chance to study with Seth Godin for 6 months. And then after that, I started helping authors, and then medium-sized brands, and then bigger brands with marketing and digital. And then in January of 2012, the phone rang, and it was a friend of a former client. She needed help with her Kickstarter project that was live. And at the time, I was not a Kickstarter expert or crowdfunding expert, but I was able to get her campaign in front of the right people and use what I knew about marketing. And that's kind of when the first flicker of the light bulb went on, like the broken neon sign started to flicker. And I realized that here is this woman who wants to make this film, but there's these gatekeepers telling her no, and telling her that, maybe it's not good enough for this thing or this festival. And so all she needed was $30,000 on Kickstarter to Okay, good.
Something weird happened. The whole internet went away from me.
No worries. No worries. Do
So,
you want to pick it up?
Just pick it up at this woman needed a video.
Sure. So this friend of a former client, she was making a film and she needed to raise $30,000 for post-production of her documentary film. And she was running into all these gatekeepers, and we were able to get her project on Kickstarter live and get it in front of the right people and raise literally just a small amount of money to allow her to finish her film. And then it did get in the festivals and it did win the awards, and she was able to bring her art to the world. It was a film about connecting generations of kids who've lost parents at war, which was her sort of life experience. And so that was the first person I would say I was able to help circumvent and get past the gatekeeper. And then as I helped more and more people with crowdfunding, everyone had a different gatekeeper. For some people, it was publishers. For some people, it was investors. You know, I didn't help this particular campaign, but Eric Mijakovsky from the Pebble Watch, I mean, he went up and down Sand Hill Road, and every VC in the Valley said, "You're crazy. Nobody wants a smartwatch." And then he launched on Kickstarter and raised $10 million. Those same venture capitalists, those same gatekeepers literally were calling him back and saying, "I'm sorry, I had a bad week last week. Can I still get in this round?" These same ones who kicked him out of their office and said, "Don't come back," were the same ones that saw him raise $10 million from directly selling the concept and the idea of the Pebble Watch to his backers raising $10 million and then them saying, "Oh," and so I've since then, and through all the crowdfunding stuff, I've started to research for the book, and I've realized that gatekeepers don't have very good taste. If you look at almost anything that's been successful, it's been literally turned down or tossed away by so many people. I mean, the Harry Potter franchise is going to throw off billions of dollars for many years to come. And the first book was turned down by every major publisher that it went to. And the only, you know who the gatekeeper who approved it? It was an 8-year-old girl. It was the daughter of one of the publishers. And he didn't look at it either because they had all these rules. They had all these ideas in their head that it's too long, children's books don't make money, all these sort of rules of the industry, right? And so his daughter was tugging on his shirt and saying, "Dad, bring some more stories home from work, give me something to read." So he basically gave it to his daughter to get rid of her while he was making dinner. And she went upstairs and devoured the first draft of Harry Potter and said, "Where is the rest of the story? I need this." And eventually, of course, it became an entire franchise. But the gatekeepers are not very good, right? Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek was turned down by 26 publishers or something like that. So we give these gatekeepers so much power, and yet their record and their past history of taste isn't exactly perfect. Now, I'm not saying every author out there, I'm not one of these people that says everyone should be an author, but I think everyone does have dreams inside of them, and they should not listen to the people who say you're not good enough, because often these gatekeepers don't have such a great track record.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't stem from the fact that, I mean, and this is one of the things we were talking about offline before coming in, is doesn't it stem from the fact that gatekeepers actually have the wrong focus? Gatekeepers are thinking about scale when success is actually much more local than that, right? Success is a very local phenomenon, and it always has been. It always has been communities that have supported great ideas, and those communities that support great ideas are much smaller than you think, but way more powerful than you think.
Yeah, you're 100% right on that, and I think your insight is spot on. That gatekeepers, for a lot of gatekeepers in this world, and I want to back up just a little bit and define gatekeepers specifically, who we're talking about, because there's a lot of definitions of the term, and there's also a few gatekeepers that I'm really glad that exist. So just to be clear, I'm thrilled that there are gatekeepers for airline pilots and heart surgeons and brain surgeons and things like that. And I never want those to go away. I never want my airline pilot to be, a creative hipster from Brooklyn who just thinks he wants to fly planes that day, right?
Let's not crowdsource medical degrees.
Exactly. So I'm thrilled that those, you need medical school before you can operate on somebody's brain. So let's be clear about that. And then I'm also not talking about the kind of gatekeepers. Often this term is used in the sense of when you're trying to sell into the enterprise or sell into B2B, the gatekeeper might be the secretary. What I'm talking about is, the agents, the book publishers, the people who have this kind of degree or title or role that can tell you no. So nobody, I would guess, almost none of your listeners have heard of my friend AJ Leon. And AJ Leon is, quote unquote, famous in our tiny, tiny little corner of the world. And he's famous to his tiny tribe that he's built up. Every year he does a conference in this big, massive metropolitan city of Fargo, North Dakota, right, middle of nowhere, out on the prairie, gets together a bunch of artisan, crazy misfit. That's the name of his tribe. They're literally misfits. So most people have never heard of AJ, but to many of us, to hundreds of us, and probably now thousands, AJ is famous. He is someone we look up to. He is the leader of this small tribe. And that's really the opportunity. I think you completely hit it on the head, which is gatekeepers want to approve something that's going to have mass scale and mass approval to reach, quote unquote, everybody. Well, nothing reaches everybody anymore, and it's the worst strategy. But that's the way that the gatekeeper often, they often have some sort of financial outlay, or like a book publisher is a great idea. They're venture capitalists for ideas. They invest in an idea, and if it does better than a certain level, if it reaches a certain level of success, then they get paid back that and more. Well, they're going to have a lot of small failures, just like regular VCs, and they need one to pay for all the rest. So they think they need this mass scale, but like you hinted at, it needs to start smaller. We all need to be AJ Leon and have 1,000 people who would lie down in traffic for us. That's how it starts. That's the platform. And what's interesting is these book publishers or these gatekeepers, they look for people who have this platform because they don't know how to do it, even though they could. It's a massive opportunity. Pick your favorite big four publisher, Simon & Schuster. Simon & Schuster every year publishes a genre book. It's like the books that they're going to come out with next year because they know their titles, well ahead of time. And in that, you can look by category and you'd say, oh, there's 4 World War II books coming out from 4 completely different authors, all about World War II. Why doesn't Simon & Schuster lead a World War II tribe? Why don't they have an email list of 100,000 people like my dad who would read every World War II book they put out, right? And why don't they do podcasts like you're doing? And why don't they do webinars in between publishing these books? The only thing they know how to do is find the authors, pay them in advance, print, package, and send it to Barnes & Noble. So that opportunity that the gatekeepers, literally you can put it on a table in front of them and they won't take it, is the opportunity that's available to all of us. And it's exactly what you're doing with this podcast.
And that's how you do your crowdsourcing too, right? I mean, the key strategy is to focus on less. And by focusing all of ourselves on one little piece, and I say little piece, there's nothing little about 1,000 people. I mean, put 1,000 people in a room and get them to say hello and think of how loud that is. Think about the thunderous force.
Exactly.
Right? Just a small group like 1,000 people. It's unbelievable.
Right. Yeah, I always say 2 things. One, 99.9% of people don't care about you, don't care about your project, don't care about your book, don't care about your Kickstarter campaign. That there's 0.1% that do. And that's not bad news. That's actually great news, because then you can focus your efforts on ignoring 99.9% and going deep and finding and giving value to that 0.1%. And we get seduced by the media and all these discussions of how many downloads do you have, how many page views do you have, CPMs and all this other stuff. When in fact, I often say, stop counting fans and followers and CPMs and start counting people who will let you crash on their couch or bail you out of jail. That's what we should be counting. And that's the number. We shouldn't have Twitter followers on our Twitter profile. We should have how many people would bail you out of jail. And then we'd have a better understanding of sort of how, because that number for AJ Leon is pretty big. I know a lot of people that would bail, and same with you, right? A lot of people that you could call and they would be there in a heartbeat. But we all know people who probably have 1 million Twitter followers who don't have many people who would bail them out of jail.
And you talked about it really quickly, right? Ignoring the 99.9%. That's the inverse part of that gatekeeper piece, right? You can't ignore the 99.9% when you're just ingesting all of this noise that's coming at us from all over the place. So being that last gatekeeper, being that vigilant gatekeeper about what's coming in is really critical, because you can't achieve focus with that stuff in your head.
Yeah, you're 100% right about that. I love that whole riff. You just wrote a third of my book right there. There's a great post. I'm sure this is one that a lot of your listeners maybe have read, but if they haven't, 1,000 True Fans by Kevin Kelly. And he initially comes at it a little bit from a commerce perspective, but it's teaching these artists, creatives, which another interesting thing about crowdfunding is that what I find is often artists and a bass player and a painter and an artist and things like that, they almost have this anti-marketing mindset, right? Another thing the media and the gatekeepers have seduced us is that you're supposed to be found, you're supposed to be discovered, you're supposed to go off in a shack and write your great American novel, and then it'll become To Kill a Mockingbird. And that's just obviously not the way it works. They want to do their art and they don't want to do the marketing. And so one of the reasons Kevin Kelly's post, 1,000 True Fans, is so brilliant is because it's this notion of building it from the bottom up, not the top down. It's not about getting in Billboard or getting a tweet from some celebrity. It's about finding 5 people, 10 people, 50 people, 100 people. Because everyone who has any level of success has 10 people who think what they put out is amazing. And you have to get to 10. So focus on 10. Don't focus on a million. Focus on bottom up. Make a list. Start making a list of names. Go through your phone. Here's a little trick. You know who you text the most? That's probably your 10 true fans, right? And you can count your mom and your sister in the first ones as you're counting from bottom up, right? And then 100 people. And his point of the post is a true fan is somebody who buys the box set, who follows you on tour, the people that follow the band Fish around or the Grateful Dead back in the day. Those are true fans. Well, as artists and creators, all you need is 1,000 true fans, because a true fan will, on average, spend about $100 a year on all the work you put out. If you're putting out work, they're going to buy the box set, or they're going to go to 2 concerts or whatever, and you're going to make $100 per true fan. And if you have 1,000 true fans, which probably means you have 10,000 or 50,000 fans in general, but 1,000 true fans who think your stuff is the best, that's $100,000, and that's plenty of money for almost everyone.
One of the things we talked about early on is this notion of fame, and that people, seek this feeling or this sense of fame, and how you felt that might have been a little bit off market. I think you're talking about a little bit right now with this 1,000 true fans and who'd really bail you out of jail. The famous ended up actually in jail a lot more often. So, but let's actually talk about this. What do you mean by fame and infamy, and how does that play into all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So Barack Obama is famous, Oprah is famous, and unfortunately the Kardashians are famous at that level where if you walk outside and you mention it to anyone on the street, they'll know who you're talking about. I actually think that kind of fame is drastically overrated and not something any one of us should sort of aspire to. On the flip side, you have, let's say, someone like Gary Vaynerchuk, who is famous in certain circles. He's famous to the people that follow him and watch the content he creates and puts out and watches his keynote talks. And, his star is growing every day, but it's such a different level and such a different scale, because when I lived in Manhattan recently, we had a wine shop that we would go to 2 blocks away. And the guy was young. He was 35 years old, manager of the wine shop. And he would talk to us about social media, and we'd give him some tips on marketing and how to better market his wine shop. And at one point we said, "Hey, have you ever heard of a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk?" And he looked at us like we were speaking German, like just never heard of him. And that is, a perfect example of, I think Seth Godin wrote a blog post called Famous to the Family, right? You want to build your own tribe and sub-tribe and micro-tribe and 1,000 true fans and become famous to your family. A friend named Paul Jarvis, great guy. And Paul Jarvis is famous to the right 5,000, 10,000 people, and he doesn't need any more than that. And most people have never heard of him, but that's the kind of fame. It's like micro fame. You want tiny shred of fame, and fame is probably even the wrong word, but famous to your own family, famous to your own tribe, just like you are to your listeners. Your listeners would miss you if you're gone. That's kind of Seth's new definition of permission marketing. It used to be personal, anticipated, and relevant messages. And now it's, would they miss you if you're gone? And if you stopped making paper napkin wisdom, a bunch of people, all your listeners, would miss you, the people that subscribe and the people that tune in. And that's the kind of thing we should all be shooting for.
It's really relevant. And I appreciate that. Clay, you had, our time is up. Like, I don't know where it went, but our time is up for today. I definitely want to have you back. I want to talk about this. And if you need help writing your book, the Paper Napkin Wisdom book just came out.
I'm just going to print the transcription of this podcast. Ship it.
But you talked about maybe having a little gift for our audience that you'd like to share.
Yeah. So this came about completely randomly. I'll tell the really quick story and then give the PDF version of the gift. So I was at a conference out here in San Diego 3 years ago, and it was an interesting conference with some really interesting people. And on the break, I turned around, shaking hands, and met the guy behind me, and he said, "Hey, what do you do?" And I won't go into detail, but I had a very sort of what I felt was a weak intro. And then I said, "Hey, what's your name? What do you do?" And he said, "Oh, I'm Matt." I said, "Oh, Matt, what do you do and what keeps you busy?" And he said, "Oh, I run a little software company." I said, "Oh, I'm into software. What software company?" He said, "Oh, it's called Automatic." And in half a second, my brain clicked over and I realized that I was speaking to Matt Mullenweg, who founded Automatic, creator of WordPress that powers 30% of the internet, completely one of my internet heroes, but not someone that I knew exactly what he looked like. I kind of had seen one or two pictures, but the guy in front of me didn't look like the picture I knew from the internet. And what's interesting is the event photographer captured the exact moment. We always talk about a jaw-dropping moment as kind of a thing. The event photographer captured literally the microsecond where my jaw dropped. I'm shaking his hand and I realized who I'm talking to. And so because of the way I walked away from that interaction, realizing I just met one of my internet heroes, and my personal self-introduction was pretty weak. It was pretty terrible. So I vowed then on to not introduce myself so poorly. So I'll give you, I know we're out of time, I'll give you the super short version, and then happy to give your listeners the full PDF with all the details. But basically, since then I came up with this way to introduce yourself. It's how to introduce yourself in 6 words or less. And so it's the base formula is I help, and then whoever it is you help, and then whatever result you help them achieve. So if I'm talking about crowdfunding, I would say I help entrepreneurs fund their dreams, because that's what I do. It's the result I help them achieve. I don't mumble on about Kickstarter and Indiegogo. So if someone says, if I'm at a certain conference and it's the right people, I say I help entrepreneurs fund their dreams. It's the ultimate response to somebody saying, "What do you do?" So what do you do? And we get asked that all the time, and I had a weak answer. So I developed this better answer, which became a formula. And now I've helped a whole bunch of entrepreneurs and creatives improve their thing. If I'm in Brooklyn speaking to a bunch of creatives, I might say I help creatives fund their dreams. So it's a great thing. And if I have a PDF that explains it all, and happy to put that up on, should we do clayhebert.com/papernapkinwisdom?
That sounds perfect.
Cool. Excellent. We'll do that, and we'll link that up.
So Clay, I loved it. And I'm going to work on mine, but off the top of my head, I've said, I help entrepreneurs make small changes that'll change their world.
That's awesome. I love that. That's great.
So that's literally make a big impact. That's it.
That's perfect. And now I hope you have a cocktail party to go to tonight so you can test it out. But
that's great.
That's perfect. I love that. That's awesome.
Thanks again, Clay.
Thank you.
Hey, if you liked that episode, there's a ton more like it on iTunes. Just search Paper Napkin Wisdom. Go to papernapkinwisdom.com to find the blog and pictures of all of the paper napkins. Plus, you can also follow along on Facebook. Find Paper Napkin Wisdom on Twitter @WiseNapkin. My name is Govind Jayaraman. This is Paper Napkin Wisdom. Thanks for watching. Make it a great day.